I'll bet you didn't know that most people either quit or stay at their jobs because of the same 4 to 8 people they interact with daily. Let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk because if you want you or your team to improve their work life, you need to begin by improving how their team works together. And my guest today is going to tell us how.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jolles.
Today's guest, Charlie Gilkey, is a business author, speaker, coach, and entrepreneur specializing in leadership, teamwork, and productivity. His new book is Team Habits: How Small Actions Lead to Extraordinary Results, just published August 2023. And you can learn more about Charlie and the book at betterteamhabits.com. And we'll remind you of that at the end of the show. Happy to have you with us and welcome to the show, Charlie.
Rob, I am so pumped up to be here. Thanks for having me.
There you go. That's why we call it Pocket Sized Pep Talks. He's pumped, folks. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And with me, I like diving right in. Can we just focus on meetings for a minute and kind of start
Let's
there?
start with meetings. Yeah.
Good. Because we sure do spend a lot of time there. So talk to me. I used to be a Zeroid. We were meeting on meetings. How do you go about trying to clean these meetings up?
So a lot of times meetings are a symptom of other bad team habits. So we don't know what to do. We don't know how to make a decision. We don't have a plan. We're not communicating. You know what? Let's have a meeting and we'll figure it out together. And they become what I call crutch meetings. Like we're having the meetings because so many other things are broken that we have to have a meeting. But of course, the frustrating thing is, Rob, as you know, the time that you spend in meetings is time that you can't be doing the other work that you're probably having meetings about, right? Yeah. And so meetings are just so easy to go to. So I'm just going to dive right in because I love your energy with that. If I were king of work for a day or president of work for the day, if you don't like monarchies, I would have a few rules. But one of those rules would be no agenda, no meeting. And that one rule would solve so many different meetings. But I need to unpack something a little bit because when I say team, like you introed this, I'm talking about the 4 to 8 people you spend 80% of your time working with. And I want that to be personal. So for this conversation, I'm going to assume that Rob and I are on a team. If our meetings suck and we're having too many of them, I can go to Rob and be like, hey, Rob, you don't like them. I don't like them. Let's do something different. I can go to Amy and Taylor and John and I can say, hey, we don't like how this is going. Let's change it. And so if we as a team, as those 4 to 8 people decide one thing, no meeting or no agenda, no meeting, what it will do is force us to start thinking about what is it we're actually trying to accomplish? What do I need from Rob that I was going to steal both his time and 5 other people's time to do that? It's like, oh, I need Rob to help me make a decision. Well, is Rob the right person to make that decision, right? Or is there somebody else? It helps you really unpack that so that when you do have meetings, your team can trust that there was a good reason to get all 4 to 8 of you there. But if you don't need to have a meeting, there's a very simple thing. You don't, right? You figure out what you needed from that teammate, you go and get it, and everybody else gets to go to work.
Yeah, it's an interesting chapter. If you don't need to go to a meeting, don't. Next chapter. But it's very simple. I agree with you. And just so you know, I was a minor Charlie Gilkey back 30 years ago because at Xerox, when I was a manager, I would not attend a meeting if I didn't have an agenda in my hand. And one more thing, Charlie, I wouldn't attend a meeting if that agenda didn't have times by it. Meaning, I see you got 4 things there. I want to know how much we're going to spend on each one because I've been to way too many meetings where we got 5 things we need to do. And we're an hour at it. We haven't even got halfway through the first one yet.
Yeah, or even worse, you show up for the meeting and you spend 15 to 20 minutes figuring out why you're at the meeting. Right. And so, what I want people to think about when it comes to meetings, to think about like the 6 different building blocks that make up meetings, right? So you have decision-making building blocks, you have update building blocks, you have review building blocks. I go through many others in the books, but when you think about that building block perspective, you're like, oh, okay, I want to start the meeting with a little bit of bonding so that we remember that we're human. We remember that we're more than just cogs in this machine and we care about each other. So that's our block there. How you doing? What's going on? And we actually make time for that. It's not chit chat. It's not a waste. It's how we bond and how we build belonging. Then it might be, okay, we have this decision we need to make as a team. So we might spend 20 minutes making that decision. And then we might be, oh, but if we make a decision, we'll need to have a little bit of a planning section that follows. That's probably going to take us about 15, 20 minutes. We can have that little planning block that's a part of it. And then we might wrap up with like next actions, who's doing what, where we actually sit down and determine who owns that, which specific person owns that. And we might have to come back to that, Rob. Yeah. What can we expect of them? And then we walk away because we came together. We did the fist bump, high five, whatever we need to do to bond. We made the one decision that we needed to make at the meeting. We had the bare bones of a plan. We got some commitments. We can go on with our day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So just think in terms of building blocks. What do you need to do? What building blocks go together? Build tighter meetings. And I don't want to come across, Rob, as I'm the anti-meeting guy, because I'm actually not. I'm the anti-bad meeting guy, right? Let's have really great meetings that we all say, you know what? I look forward to that meeting. I know what I'm going to get out of it. I feel like it was a good use of time and I would do it again, right? 5 stars.
Right.
And the rest, let's drop.
Right. Listen, you're extremely clear on that. And for anybody who's, folks who are listening, the reason why you want to get this book is if you can improve your meeting by 10% across the board, you just bought 1,000 of Charlie's books annually. So we're talking, you can't imagine how much time is lost. And Charlie, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show, and this really is interesting to me, is as a Xeroid, when Xerox really knew, before they kind of lost their way, one of the things that was very unique about this massive corporation is in the first 4 days of employment, you sat through a program, not only learned how to problem solve and quality improve, but you learned how to run a meeting because we knew we were going to be in meetings and we had roles in those meetings and we had timed agendas in those meetings. One role was a timer who did nothing but keep an eye on that timed agenda. Yep. But it's not lost on me on how much time is wasted. And let me just throw one more thing at you. I'd be interested on your reaction to this. One thing I think also that really poisons a meeting is we actually want to disagree. It's healthy to disagree, but do we know how to disagree in a meeting?
Precisely.
So talk to me about that a little bit. Does your book go through that at all?
Yeah, well, it turns out, so I break down team habits into 8 different types of team habits. Good. And I start with belonging for this very reason. Rob, if Rob and I we've got each other's back. Our kids carpool together. I know his favorite songs. I know he's written a couple of books. We do all that chit chat. It turns out that in a meeting, I can disagree with Rob and we can have healthy conflict and tension, but it's not personal. He knows I'm not coming after him. He knows I'm not running at him with a knife and trying to cut him down. It's like we both care about the work and we want the work to be the best. And we get that by that just might be the vibe that Rob and I have. We sharpen each other because iron sharpens iron. And we can do that because we have such high belonging. And in fact, we may have a bond high enough to know that if we don't do that for each other, we're slipping. That's what we do for each other. Right?
Yeah.
And so much of what you're talking about where we can't disagree with, or we can't call someone into a conversation is because we don't actually have that belonging and trust anymore. Right. Because if you have that, and again, I want to make work personal again, in the sense of with those 4 to 8 people, know who they are, know what matters to them, know why you're on the same team together, know what their buttons are, right? Know what lights them up, know what shuts them down. And, one thing I get, you haven't asked that yet, but some people are like, Charlie, that doesn't scale. And I'm like, I don't care that it doesn't scale because it's 4 to 8 people. If you can't figure out how to care about 4 to 8 people, you should probably wonder why they don't care about you, right? Because we want to so much of the disengagement that happens at work in the workplace now is because of how people feel like they're treated like cogs and like just replaceable and it doesn't matter. And yet in many teams, that's exactly what the teammates do to each other.
Yeah.
Right. So if you don't like being treated like a cog, don't treat your teammates like a cog. If they're slipping, they might want to know, because if you were slipping, you would want Rob, like Charlie would want Rob to say, hey, Charlie, like, I know you're trying real hard, but that ain't it, bro. Like, we got to fix that. And I would want that from Rob, which means I need to be that for Rob too. And I need to figure out how Rob needs to hear that, so that he knows that I'm not tearing him down, but I'm trying to help him be the person that he wants to be, because he's told me who he wants to be.
Right.
Right. And so much of that sort of tension evaporates when we remember 4 to 8 people. It's Rob and Charlie. It's these people, how are you going to make work better together, and not count on the executives, not count on a bunch of other forces, but just show up and care together.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're describing a healthy team. Not all of us have the luxury of being on a healthy team. So that's why there are process behaviors. That's why there are techniques and moves. So I'll throw one at you. Maybe you throw one back at me. I was always fond of what we called a support and build, meaning I want to disagree with Charlie, but we don't really drive each other's kids to school. Matter of fact, Charlie and I have never really been the best of friends. We're on a team, so we work together and we respect each other. So I want to, in front of those other 7 people, I want to be careful how I disagree. And if I look at Charlie and just go, well, no, I think it's this way. Well, and the good news is I'm disagreeing. That's healthy. The bad news is that can be taken personally. To say something like, Charlie, I think that's a really good idea that we look and try and take our budget and apply it in more than one just direction. Could I suggest that maybe we take it? And so I'm building off his idea. In a sense, I'm disagreeing, but it's not as lethal as that direct. If our kids are going to school together, I can look in the eye and go, that's not working for me. But that's more of the exception to the rule.
I think it's the exception to the rule because we allow it to be the exception to the rule.
Oh, okay.
Right. Now, I'm not trying to say that everyone has to love everybody at work and things like that, but how much time, I'm just going to ask the listener, how much time have you invested in creating that type of relationship with your peers, with your coworkers, with your team? And if you haven't invested that time, why are you waiting on them to invest the time? Right. And so I'm just going to give a little pushback that like a normal or healthy team on this side of things is just some unicorn that most of us don't live in. And it's like, well, that truly high performing, high belonging teams are rarer than we would like them to be. But I would also say that there's nothing magical about them. It's just how the people show up together. And granted, there are macro cultural elements of the org culture and things like that, because the folks at the top and the organizational culture can create a dog eat dog sort of scenario. So I understand that. But I've done enough work in the world of coaching and consulting to know that even in those structures, you can have a rock solid team that violates the cultural norms and sticks together and wins despite all of that going on. So I hear you on that, Rob. So here's what I'm saying. I'm supporting Rob's thing, but I'm building on it right at the same time.
You are. Well
right?
done.
But the other thing we can say is like another sort of way of approaching that is saying, hey, Rob, like I really hear this idea and I'm excited about it and I want us to be successful with it. I'm concerned because I don't know how this piece works. Could you explain to me your thoughts about that so that I can really understand how it works with what we're doing?
Yep.
Right.
Now you're creeping into the world of sales, which I always love living in, by the way. And when we have an objection, one of the key moves we have to make is don't respond, clarify. Even if I understand what the issue is, maybe I don't. Maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe I just should not rush in with a response. Even if I'm right, I'm going to come across as someone who's really not listening. So I love the move that you just threw out there of, let's keep seeking information. Again, I was a guy who would used to sit in on meetings with an interactive skills pad, and I was counting. Believe me, my eyes were crossing after an hour, but I was counting every time that group sought information, every time that group gave information, every time they tested understanding, summarized, disagreed, attacked, build, support, shut people out, brought people in. And you can really get a visual of how a team is working. It's brutal to describe it, but it really works.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, like I know that that culture where Rob and I might disagree and we might just tussle with each other about things. That might be Rob and my vibe, but it might not be the vibe of the rest of the team. Why couldn't we create a team habit that when the other 4 people are just witnessing this cage match, that they can be like, time out, Rob, Charlie, y'all talk about that for another 25 minutes or so and figure out what you're going to do. And we're going to go do something else because we're not really participants at this point, right? We don't need to be here for this. And it's not actually helping anything.
Yeah.
Right. We're uncomfortable. We don't want to engage in that way. It's not a value add. So let's break this meeting into a conversation between you two.
Yeah.
We're going to go do something else. When you two come up with some sort of decision, you get there, let us know, because we don't need to be involved in the sort of rolling around in the cage match that you all have going on over there.
Yeah. And
we can do that just as well.
Yeah, I feel almost selfish here. I want to tell you, in 3 years and 285 podcasts, I've never had anybody on twice, but I may have you on twice because I could live on this meetings piece with you. And I got 9 more questions in my head yet. Thinking I got to push forward, but maybe sometime down the road, let's just talk meetings, because
I'm here for it, Rob.
Yeah, yes. because we're just opening this can up. And reason number 7 why you want to check this book out, because if you can glean any ideas of how to improve that meeting, and we can crawl before we walk and walk before we run, but simply going with what came out of Charlie's mouth in the first sentence, which was an agenda. If you just make that move in the morning, you're already ahead of the ball game. We'll just fine tune it from there. So let me push you a little bit further, because we got teams, and I see this all the time as a salesperson of, I can see a problem. I know it's a problem, but my client doesn't necessarily know it's a problem. So we have a team that may not be functioning as well as we'd like them to do and function, but they're not necessarily asking for help. How do we kind of bridge that gap and get in there and work with groups that don't necessarily see this as a problem?
Yeah. So here's the funny thing about humans. We are all invested in the change we want to see, but we resist outside change. So we want people to invest in and buy our change, but we don't want to invest in and buy their change, right? And so you have to flip this. This is a sales and persuasion thing. What I would say is most of these team change initiatives fail because you have some outside force, either a manager or a consultant comes in and says, this team needs to do this and we need to get them there. And they're trying to use push goals and they're trying to use sticks and all sorts of things, instead of asking, hey team, here's what we're seeing. How does this line up to how you want to be and where you're going and how you see with each other? Right. And really get them saying, like, you know what, like, actually that doesn't work, but I didn't know we can fix it. Or yeah, like it really kind of sucks that our commit to complete ratio is only 30%, which means that anytime we commit to something, there's, a 70% chance we're not going to complete it. That sucks. Okay. Well, what would you like that to be? And what are some steps to make it can be? And even, we're using what's called the IKEA principle here. Right. And the IKEA principle is, if we find that people feel as invested and feel the satisfaction of building a piece of the thing as much as if they built the whole thing. Right. And so too many managers, too many consultants come in and build the whole thing and say, a team, do this. Team doesn't want to do that. Right.
Right.
Instead of saying, team, here's what we're seeing. What are you seeing? Here's our goals. Let's get some alignment here. Now that we have that alignment, what are your team habits that can change? What would you like to improve? What's painful to you? What's pissing you off at work that we can change here? Oh, that pisses me off. Let's do that. And then you get them on board and they feel a part of the plan. And it's not manipulative just in the sense of like, you're just playing mind games on it. They care, like people care about things they care about. That sounds like a tautology, but it's actually a lot of insight in there. Like trying to get people to care about something they don't care about is the hard road.
Yeah.
Figuring out what they care about and aligning your goals with theirs is the simplest and easiest way to get teams bought into the plan that they are co-creating versus the one that they just have to follow.
Yeah. All right. But let me throw a fly in the ointment.
Okay, let's go.
The fly in the ointment is the manager. Okay. And as a guy who teaches sales training, one of the best groups I love to teach how to sell are managers. Mm-hmm. Because what you've just described, in a perfect world, is a leader of some sort, let's call it the manager right now, who makes this their idea, not his idea. That's the home run. That's what we're looking for. And there are processes for that. And I won't bore you with that. But that's what you're describing. I love it. I don't know what it is about me today. I am so always half full, but with you, I'm like half empty. Every question is like, yeah, but what happens? But again, in corporate America, we have some managers. I don't want to grab any percentages, but if I was guessing, I'd say 50-50. Okay. Who we'll teach them how to sell, their team how to sell, but they're just looking for numbers. They don't give a hoo-ha whether we use that process or not. Bring me those numbers. We've got a wonderful way for people to meet, for people to bond. But we've got a manager in the way who says, just give me the answer. How do you work around a manager that's in the way of the team?
Okay. So to answer that, I'm going to have to slide in a framework on you.
All
Okay.
right.
So the reason work conversations are so fraught is because we only focus on 2 dimensions of power, but there are really 3 that are at play at any workplace, right? So let's talk about the 2 we talk about a lot. So the first is personal power. That's power 2. That's what Charlie can do with his own expertise and learning and capabilities. I can just push that and grab it forward, or grab it and take it forward all by myself, right? That's one that we talk about. The other that we talk a lot about is institutional power, which is what you're bringing up here, the power over. I'm the manager. Just do what I tell you to do. Like, I have this power and I can lord over you in a certain way. And if you only play in that space, you corrupt a lot of power, right? You corrupt a lot of things. The missing piece, Rob, is interpersonal power. It's this gap in between. It's what I and Rob can do together that we can't do separately. But we don't need institutional power to get done. Like, we don't need our manager to fix that thing. We don't need our manager to do some of these things. The reason I want to invoke this is because managers forget that they are part of the matrix that creates interpersonal power. And when they choose, like, it sounds coachy, but I'm a coach, so we'll go there. When you choose a paradigm, you reinforce that paradigm. When they choose the institutional power paradigm, they reinforce that paradigm, which means people feel lorded over, they feel pushed, they feel like they don't have any agency, they don't feel any of that. So they're always going to resist you. They're always going to fight you on that. But when the manager, who can be a great manager, is also just Rob. Rob is doing his best. He's one of us. He's trying real hard. He's got some things that he does differently than we do. Then we can open up that dialogue, and Rob doesn't have to use the institutional power. Rob doesn't have to do that. We can build that alignment. And so what I would say in that scenario is I would unpack for what I would call that bad manager, like their view of that institutional power, and show basically it's not working for you. You can keep doing what you're doing and getting the same bad result. And if that's really what you want to do, like, where you're going to be 6 months or a year from now. Right. It's not working. Try something different. And it turns out it's not as hard to go to your team and say, you know what? We got to switch things up a little bit, right? The way I've been doing this and talking about this is clearly not really landing with you all. And I have some work that I need to do. I'm learning too. And look, team, this is where we need to go, right? This is where we need to go, not just because I want you to do there and I'm looking for my own bonus and performance. This is what we need to do to keep this team funded, which means this is what we need to do to keep your jobs. That's the reality of it.
Right.
I want us all to be successful. This is what it looks like.
You describe such a wonderful world. And I'm with you. I work and coach like you do so many people who have usually have managers that aren't buying in, and when they are, you and I don't have as much work to do. But
what I would say here is why does the culture allow those managers to continue to do that? Because they're not effective, right? And so on and so forth. And so I hear you. And people quit and leave their jobs because of bad managers.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Rob and Charlie, we love working together, but like Steve, he's a pain in the butt. Right. And what Steve does. And so I hear you. And I've seen time and time again that if you're talking about the manager, it's also in that same way that I got the alignment from the team, getting the line with the manager and saying, look, Steve, I know you're stressed. There might be a lot of things going on. What you're doing is not working. You know it. you're frustrated, you just keep trying to crack the whip harder, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
You want to be successful. I want to be successful. We want this organization to be successful. What do we have to lose by trying to actually tap into the intelligence and can do and rapport of this team to get this done? Because what we're doing, we're just not going to, it's not going to work. Or it's like, how much blood are we going to pull out of the stone? And is that how we want to show up day in and day out?
Yeah. And, I'm going to transition off. I feel like we interrupt this program to tell you that, folks, we need to train our managers a little bit better. It's a whole nother topic, but so often we have managers who sold more widgets, moved more widgets, produced more widgets, whatever it was. And somebody said, now you're a manager with very little training. And I don't think that training solves everything in this world. But boy, delegation and recognition and just the ability to do a lot of the things you're talking about. If we just spend a little bit more time on the front end there, things would be a whole lot easier. All right, let me
real quick on that, Rob.
Yeah,
I want to say this. My background is actually from the Army, the United States Army, right? I was an Army officer. And so people are like, yeah, this is just how managers are. It's like, you have never seen some soldiers and troops as dug in as you will see from the Army and Marines and some of the folks that I worked with. And yet, even in those conditions, people change, people realize what's not working, so on and so forth. And so I agree with you 100%. Someone that has promoted that high-performing individual contributor to a manager position needs to sit down and say, okay, cool. You've done a great job in that role doing it that way. That way of showing up is no longer your job. You have to figure out how to get that done through people.
Yeah.
Right. And if it's just you pushing the ball forward, guess what? We need to push you back as an individual, contributor, because that's your mindset. But understand, with this role, with this pay bump, it is not about what you drive with your own hands and your own energy by yourself. You will fail if that's what you think this job is. This is the job. Yep. Someone needs to have that presentation. Same thing. Someone needs to have the presentation when a manager gets promoted into an executive position. It's like, you've learned to run standard processes. You've learned to do it this way. That's not the job you have anymore. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to throw a bunch of complex, amorphous decisions at you that don't really have a clear right answer, that we probably haven't done before, that are high stakes.
Yeah.
You need to figure out how to navigate in that space. If you can't, don't take this job, because that's the job, right? If you're just going to think that you're going to be a great manager and that creates a great executive, you've got another thing coming.
Yep.
So we just need to have that job. Like, you get this type of promotion, this is the role.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. I hear you. I think one of the best managers, since I've been dinging managers now, I mean, tell you about a good one. The best manager I ever had said it in one sentence. And for the rest of my life, I've always thought that really is the litmus test for a manager. And all he said was, brought me in and he's introduced himself. He says, my job is to figure out where you want to go to and help you to get there. And and he walked that walk, Charlie. And we'd run through walls for this guy. He was great, but he didn't complicate it. That's the job.
Yeah.
That's what he was there for. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Well, and so many of us, this goes a little bit deeper than maybe just the team level. So many people get stuck at that manager level because they confuse how hard they work with their own self-worth.
Yep.
And when you do that, you have to work exceptionally hard. You make things difficult and so on and so forth, versus really looking at what we're talking about. The best managers and leaders are the ones that do the least effort to the team as far as getting them to do something. There are certain things, like I'll talk about my job as an Army commander. My troops wanted me to mess with echelons above reality and do all of that politicking job and do all that sort of whatnot. That was my unique ad, and to distill that into what they needed to do in the what land, not the how land. But here are the priorities. Here are the objectives we have to hit. Make it happen, y'all. 219 people could then execute against that. They did not want me changing tires. They did not want me, like, that was not my key and unique ad. Right. And so for managers, executives, I know we've been on it a little bit, but really for your team, what is your unique value add? And I bet it's not how hard you work.
Bingo. The book is called Team Habits: How Small Actions Lead to Extraordinary Results. I know we can find it on Amazon and online stores. Is there an audio book on this?
There's an audiobook for it,
Oh,
read by yours truly. So if
yeah.
you want more of this, you can get an audiobook.
Yeah. You want more of that gravelly voice? He's there for you. Uh, I shouldn't throw stones. I've got the gravelly voice myself. Uh, I like the fact that you're paying attention to introverts. I really do. I think that they can get lost. And the funny thing is, and I work with a lot of introverts, authors that write about being introverts. They'll come crashing through. It's a little bit awkward when they do, but their instinct is to lay back. But you wrote a book about teams. So, how do are there some moves that we can make to pay attention to these introverts and make it a little bit easier for them to kind of naturally assimilate into the team?
Yeah, there are a few things. One is to understand that someone being quiet does not mean that they're not contributing and that they're not paying attention and they're not engaging. That's one of the fundamental rules that extroverts like, oh, Amy didn't say anything the whole meeting. No, Amy was rapidly processing everything that's going on. Right. And she probably knows more about what's going on at that meeting than everyone else who was talking did. So, first off, quiet does not equal not contributing. Two, pause, slow down, invite them into the conversation. Look, a couple of folks like Rob and Charlie talking in the meeting, we're going to clog up a bunch of the space and we're just going to have fun. It's going to be a blast. It is hard when you're an introvert to claw your way into that conversation, right? And so this is where Rob and Charlie need to practice. Hey, we've been talking a lot. Amy, John, what are your thoughts on this? And it's okay if you don't have any, but we at least want to, or that you don't have any that you feel comfortable articulating right now. They always have ideas, right? The third thing that we can do, and it goes back to the no agenda, no meeting sort of thing. Let people know in advance what you're going to be talking about so they can sort their thoughts and come in and be prepared to have that conversation. So many of the people who exhibit forms of leadership that our society rewards are extroverted, fast-talking social processors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Come together in a room, we'll figure it out. We don't need to know what's going on. We don't need research. We can just do it. And that is one form of leadership, again, that our society rewards for different ways. But a lot of people don't function well in that environment. A lot of people are going to sit back because of, maybe there are people who have learned that speaking up when they don't know 100% of it is like bad, or maybe they're just not comfortable like saying 13% of an idea when they would rather be at the 96, 97% range, right? Yeah. So if we did those three things, one, respect that someone being quiet, it might be their way of most fully participating in the meeting. It's a mind twist, right? Two, actively slow down and call them into the conversation and give them the way such they can, without retribution or punishment, say, you know what, I'm good. I'm still processing this. I'll come back later. Three, let them know in advance what you're going to be talking about. And if I had to throw in a fourth one, follow up with them in a lower social stakes environment. Hey, Amy, I know you were quiet. I know you're always thinking about it. I saw that light in your eyes. What are some of the things you were thinking about from that meeting in a one-on-one conversation? You're going to get those gems out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So just don't try to force people to be that wide-eyed social processor, confident, sort of, proto-masculine, sort of leadership model. Because one, time and time again, it shows that's actually not the best form of leadership. And two, it doesn't fit a lot of people and doesn't need to.
Yeah. Well said. In the world of corporate training, for instance, we run small groups, but sometimes what I'll do is I actually make them much smaller, because an introvert may feel very uncomfortable in a group of 6 or 7, but put them in a group of 2 or 3, and sometimes you don't have to ask them twice. It's a numbers thing. The numbers get a little bit big for them. But I really love the fact that you're doing, and I was looking for that process behavior, Charlie. We would call it bringing in, not waiting for the person, giving them a nice, easy opportunity to come in. Don't force it. But sometimes and it doesn't have to be an introvert. I'm just labeling people introvert. Sometimes the person sitting on the sideline there has been listening and has, without any emotion, may have some of the greatest ideas your team will ever find, because they haven't been battling their way in and focusing on what they want to say. they've been taking it all in and sitting there. So love the move of, and I also love the move of maybe talking beforehand, but love the move of kind of manually just giving them the ability, an easier way to get in. The last thing I'll leave it, but I'm in a meetup with podcasters, and last meetup we had, there was one guy on there. I said, Larry, see you about 4 meetings now. I've never heard you speak. And he said, well, I have a few things to say, but I just can't get in because there's a lot of talkers in this meeting. Go figure. It's a group of podcasters. So don't think that you're necessarily going to embarrass somebody by just making it nice, easy, and just kind of work a way around. Say, hey, let's work way around the room. And how about you, Bill? Just nice and easy. You'll be shocked at what you might learn.
Precisely. And we have a member of our team who is one of the quieter ones. And she wears what I call the voice of no a lot, right? And so I talk about this in the book. And she's the person that, in the very gentlest of ways will say, hey, have you thought about this thing? And the whole team knows when she speaks up, because she's normally pretty quiet. When she says, hey, have you thought about that? I was like, slow down. She pointed out a problem. It's not actually is an open question. It's more like it's her way of pointing out that there's either a critical flaw or a constraint that we're not talking about. And so it's just like that she might say 2 sentences in the entire meeting, but the team knows like, oh, wait a second. We need to pay attention to that, right? She's not going to say like, what I would say is like, look, it seems like you all are running into a ditch on this one, right? I can see it going. There's a ditch happening. What are we going to do? She might not say something that bold or that simple, but she might be like, hey, have we thought about how this lines up with, our plan about, this other thing? And then that will make me stop and be like, oh no, we haven't even considered that. Right. We need to slow down. And so again, we know that just because she's in the meeting and she's normally quiet doesn't mean she's not paying attention. Exactly. She will ask that question, and that's great, right? Yep. And also we'll call on her. It's like, hey, you have anything? She's like, no, I'm good. And then we move on.
Right. Sometimes when we brainstorm, everyone is used to what we call freewheeling, which is, all right, let's just throw some ideas. But you can use, and these are those mechanisms we're talking about, you can use a round robin approach, which just means we're going from seat to seat to seat to seat to seat. We may go 2 rounds at that, then we'll freewheel it. But if I have a team where everybody's in, I don't have to round robin. But again, these are mechanisms that can be used. And they're effective because I'm with you. They frequently, it's not an accident. They have been processing and listening while we've been talking. And I want them in that meeting. All right, last question.
Yeah, well, real quick, I'm going to make the obvious explicit here.
Okay.
There's a difference when you're approaching this from respecting that those quieter folks or those people who engage differently are there and participating and contributing in their own unique way versus when you're trying to make them be something they're not. Right. If you're doing it, you can use the same mechanisms from a different spirit and it will they'll feel that. So I first want people to really understand and accept the paradigm that how they're engaging may actually be a great way of engaging and how they add value to the team and how we can appreciate them. Yep. Then let's use the mechanism, but don't use the mechanism to force people to be like someone else.
Perfect. Well said. All right. You write about decision-making logs. Okay. And you threw a couple of names out there, Notion or Confluence. I'm a pack rat for processes and techniques, things that are repeatable, predictable. So when I was looking over you, I went, oh, I want to hear a little bit more about it because to me, it beats, you really want to make sure that you address that, folks. You've actually got some ways to do it. Can you talk about that just for a moment or two?
Yeah. So basically a decision log is what it sounds like. When you make a key decision that affects your team, not only do you make it in the meeting, but you put in a log that your team can review about important decisions. Why that is so important is because 6 months from now, you're not going to remember the conversation. You're not going to remember why you decided a thing, but you can look back and be like, hey, I think didn't we make a decision about that? Or is this in the decision log? And you can look over and say, oh, we talked about this thing and decided it for these reasons. We had these assumptions in play, right? And so it helps you debug that PS decision, say, oh, our assumptions were wrong because now we know X, Y, and Z. Or what happens for a lot of teams, Rob, is there's like, oh, the assumptions are the same. The conditions are the same. We've already made this decision. Let's not talk about it anymore because nothing's changed. And you can just put this in whatever knowledge-based tool that you use, or even just put it in Google Docs and just call it a decision log. And whenever that comes up, just get used to, when you're having one of those heated strategic or operational discussions and you come down, it's like, this is what we're doing, y'all. Having a teammate on the team that has a role of saying like, okay, what are our assumptions and what are we thinking about on this? Why did we come to that decision? So document it, put it in the log. So that way you 4 to 8 people, next time you're grappling with that same decision, one of you is likely going to remember, we talked about this in March. Let's go see what we said in March.
Right.
And do we have better information now? Or is this just another bright, shiny object? Right, that we need to call it as it is and move on about our days, because our previous decision, everything still stands, nothing's changed, move on. And so that's really one of the things that makes teamwork so exhausting, especially around decision making, is just when we over litigate the same things over and over and over again, and like every 3 months it's like we're talking about the thing again. Why did you make those decisions? Articulate those assumptions, and that way whenever someone wants to litigate it again, we can look at it and say, okay, have assumptions changed? Have constraints changed? Or is there some new information that we didn't have at the last time? And if the answer is all 3 of those is no, case closed, let's move on.
Yeah. I think one of the problems that we have out there is that no one really knows the definition of consensus. I know this sounds silly, but I remember, at Xerox, we actually changed all our manuals, all our books, because we initially had consensus, meaning, in quotes, I can live with it. And that wasn't helping anybody, because as you just said, particularly without a decision log, the moment somebody said, I can live with it, and it didn't quite, it's going to take a little bit more time, a little more work. I told you this and that. So we actually changed it to, in quotes, I can support it. And we would teach that, meaning if you can, and you really think that this is vital to the organization, then stay put. If not, I don't want you to live with it. I want you to support it. You're on the ship with us. That's a tough little line that sometimes, again, leaders struggle with.
Exactly. Well, and support it can mean different things when it turns out. It's like, I fundamentally think we should have gone another direction. That is my true belief. Yeah. However, I am going to put resources and I'm going to commit to this as if it were my decision.
Yes.
That's what I support it means. It doesn't mean that I conceptually agree with every piece of it. It means we leave this room and we are all putting our resources behind a common initiative, and we're not doing this backwards litigation thing. Yep. Great. And if you're at a place to where you can't support other teammates' initiatives and decisions unless it's exactly what you would do, exactly how you would do it, well, 1, you're probably a bad team player, and 2, why should you expect them to support you all the time, right? It's a negotiation, compromise, and a sort of accommodation that is part of this thing called teamwork. Sometimes you get absolutely your way, how you want it. Other times you don't, but you show up for people the way you would want them to show up for you.
Yep. The will of the team. Team habits, how small actions lead to extraordinary results. How do they get a hold of you, Charlie?
So if you like what we're talking about here, you can go to betterteamhabits.com and you'll learn more about team habits and get some more resources on that. As Rob mentioned at the beginning of the call, I also have a broader body of work around productivity, specifically doing the work that most calls to you. And you can find that at productiveflourishing.com. Perfect.
And on our site, we'll have your LinkedIn address and all that contact information for everybody. I have to tell you, we were talking before we went live, and I said, we'll probably go about 30 minutes, maybe 40, muttering under my breath, unless it's really interesting, then I tend to go a little bit longer. So we went a little long today, but I already told you, we just scratched the surface of meetings. We double dipped a few times, but it's that important. I think you're totally right. When I train people and I work with people in career transition, my number one goal is we'll get to your interview skills, everything, all that. I need you to convince me that you're going to be a team player. And if you can do that in an interview, don't have to worry about getting all your star stories right. That's what makes companies and organizations go. And the smart ones know it, and they're looking for it. You have been just a pleasure to talk to, Charlie. I'm really grateful to have you on. And as I mentioned, we'll have you back on, and maybe we'll just focus on a little bit more on those meetings. But really a thrill talking to you. Thank you.
Same, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Bet. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everyone. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.